Hi, everyone. This is Rex Saldana along with my pal Mark Stevens, and we're back for episode 22 of our podcast, which is a very special one. This is We Were Tourists with Jim Toomey, who I don't think needs any introduction to Eurythmics fans around the world as to who he is. Um, of course, the Tourists were a new wave band, successful in the late 70s and early 80s. And Dave, Stewart, and Lennox, of course, were members of that band. So we're going to talk to Jim today about all things Tourist and what's going on with his current life and what he's doing and performing. And we'll also talk about his book, We Were Tourists, which came out, I believe, in 2018. And we'll talk about some things in that book as well. So I'm going to start out by saying, welcome, Jim. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. We really are glad you're here.
Hi, guys. Yeah, good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Jim, where are you joining us from? Where are you at the moment?
Where am I at? I'm at Brisbane, Australia.
Okay.
And I've been here. I lived in Japan for a couple of years. I've been back here now for 8 years. So I'm kind of, as I say, as I quoted before, I've parked my car. I finally parked my car and I'm in Brisbane. So I'm a resident here now.
Okay, wonderful.
All right.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Okay,
It's
so
the
you
next day there.
yes.
It's what?
It's the next day there from where we are. We're several hours behind you.
You're in the
I know.
future.
Australia's always been ahead, as you probably realize.
Right. Well, so Jim, you wrote a book that came out a few years ago, We Were Tourists, about your time with the band The Tourists. Tell us what made you decide to write the book?
I don't know, really. I've always been an avid collector. I've always kept diaries, and all the years I spent before meeting Dave and Annie, I'd kind of written bits and pieces in exercise books, longhand, and kind of kept them all in a box. And then I thought, well, it might be nice to capture. We had so many adventures in the Tourists, and of all the bands I was in before then and after then, come to that was obviously the most successful thing I ever did. And I thought, right, 3-year gig, I'll capture it all. So it kind of wrote itself, really. I was sort of going through my diaries, digging out all these dusty exercise books. Yeah, so I didn't really plan it. It kind of happened. It's weird, hard to describe, really.
Yeah.
It's a really well done book. I mean, when I bought it when it first came out, and it really is a good read. You really did a really good job. You can tell that you had kept really good notes, and you had really good memories of it, of course. But it's a really well done book. I'm very.
Oh, thank you very much. I actually, when the band split, we all went back to London, and it's probably hard to believe because you've read it, but I actually did attend a creative writing school in London, which is, as I said, probably hard to believe. So I did a little bit of kind of research, I suppose, and trying to learn the art of writing, Yeah.
But at that time you didn't really have a plan to do a biography, did you? Or
No, that was years before. I'd been writing short stories.
Okay.
I've always done that, and like silly kind of things, notes and stuff. But I just, when we got back, I was so bored after all that excitement. I'd already filled in my forms for the immigration. And I've got a really funny story about the immigration, but if I digress, you better stop me.
We're all for funny stories, so feel free to tell it.
Okay, all right. Well, a quick one. I got my interview at the British Embassy, and so I didn't have a suit. I sort of borrowed my father's suit, and my hair was sort of sticking out, and I had the interview, and they very politely said no, because Australia doesn't need any more musicians, So I went, oh, okay, thanks very much. So I wrote to my sister, who lives and still does in Melbourne, who's got a travel agency. So I said, Marie, they've turned me down as a muso. Can I come and work for you? So she said, yeah. So I got another interview, and I turned up wearing the same suit and my hair sort of, and my surname, of course, I was last, T. So I've been waiting for like 5 hours, and there's all these grumpy looking men. And this pretty girl came out and said, Mr. Toomey. So I went, yes, yes, yes. And I followed her, and I thought, well, down this long corridor, and I thought, well, she's the secretary. She interviewed me, and she said, oh, you've been to Australia before? I said, yeah, I worked there in a band and blah, blah, blah. And she said, you've already been turned down. Suddenly you're a travel agent. I said, yes, I've got this great idea of being a travel agent. I can book bands to Australia. And she was going, oh, yeah, you know, yeah. So what band were you in? I said, oh, it's a band called Tourist. And she said, you're joking. I saw you at the Hammersmith Odeon.
Wow.
And at that point, half my hair fell out. And I said, did you really? She said, yeah. I said, that was me at the back there, you know, doing all this business. And I won't exaggerate. She didn't just go bump, bump and stamp it, but she went, oh, well, that, you know, and the interview just flowed after that. And I got in.
What a great
So that's quite a nice little story, isn't it? The tourists finally came through for me.
So you were able to come in as a musician and not having to change to travel agent, right?
Oh no, I am a travel agent.
Oh, okay.
Officially.
Okay. Well, you should.
But it was a great scam, wasn't it?
This is bad, but you should have called the book "From a Tourist to a Travel Agent." No, I'm kidding. That was
from
bad.
travel
Sorry.
to tourism. Yeah.
Anyhow.
But one thing I wanted to ask you, and I had read that you had sent the book before it was published. Am I correct on this? To Dave Stewart and to Annie Lennox. And I don't know if you were asking their permission or if you were just saying, could you give me your feedback? Did you do that? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I applied to about 5 different publishing companies, and it was too thick. There were too many words. There was too much about crazy things. And they said, look, do an edit. So I've been doing all these edits. And I came to eventually got an offer from Austin Macaulay, which are a really good publishing company based in London. And they've got offices in New York and all over. And they said, yeah, Jim, great. We want to sign you, but we need permission, obviously, from the people you're referring to in the book, i.e. Eddie, Dave, Pete, and Annie. And so I wrote to Dave, and I knew Dave wouldn't be a problem. Mad as a hatter. He said, yeah, Jim, I'll do anything. You know, he said, I love the book. And he said, I'll even write he wrote me a reference, what's it called on the front page? A forward, yeah. So he wrote me, he said, I'll write you a forward. And I thought, great, you know, but Annie, I was waiting for ages. And finally, her manager, a lady at that time, came through to me and she said, Jim, Annie loves it, but there is one sentence that worries us, and it was a drug reference. And I said, oh, I can delete that, you know, and got onto. I said, yeah, that's done. I was thrilled. Annie actually okayed it, so I got permission both from Dave and Annie, and Eddie, and of course, unfortunately, by then Pete had passed away. Yeah, so to answer your question, I did have to go through that. And Annie, bless her heart, I mean, as you've read the book, I mean, it's warts and all. I didn't miss anything out. And so, yeah, I always will appreciate that from both of them. Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's great.
Wonderful. Yeah. I just wanted to ask you, there's some photographs in the book, and there's one taken which is in the south of America, where you're all standing in front of a record store sign called Peaches. The record store was called Peaches. Now, I grew up in the South, and that was the big record store chain there. So I grew up in Florida. I don't know if you remember. Did you ever play in Florida? Do you remember?
I don't think we actually played there, but that's where we flew back from to go to the Caribbean.
Okay, yeah. It's just funny to
Dave Stewart was walking around the airport with a dog's leg. Yeah, I don't I don't think we actually played in Florida, but that's where we ended up after the long tour. Yeah.
It's just a little jarring for me to see that that sign of that store I know so well. I was like, wow, were they somehow near me when I was 10 years old?
Yeah, we probably jumped off the truck and just had our photos taken on the way to the airport. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, but it's a good picture. I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great picture. I read in the book that you were like a session drummer in the 60s and 70s for a lot of different artists and that you toured and performed with.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in the book that that's what kind of gave you the, I guess, experience which helped you with the tours. Tell us about that experience in the 60s and 70s, working with those artists and going around like that. That must have been pretty thrilling for you.
It was, yeah. I mean, the first time I went to America was with Colin Blunstone, who was the lead singer in the Zombies.
Yeah.
Those classic songs, Time of the Season, She's Not There.
Mm-hmm.
He went solo. The Zombies had broken up years before. Rod Argent had formed a band called Argent, which were quite successful. They had a big hit with Hold Your Head Up, you might remember. So at that time, I'd turn up at the studio with no idea who I'm recording with. And when I met Colin Blunstone, awfully well-spoken, public school boy. Oh, hello, And I recorded 2 albums with him. One was called Ennismore, and the other one was called, got it written down here. Oh, yeah, 1 Year. And there's been a big renaissance lately of Colin has re-released 1 Year, and it's got great reviews. And so that was the sort of thing I was doing. And then Colin took me to America, and we formed this great band, all with session guys, and they were complete lunatics. You meet any session musician that's stuck in studios, you give them a tour, and it's party time, That was a great fun band, and we had a week in each town, and so I had all that experience behind me. Mick Ronson, I did the Old Grey Whistle Test with. He played guitar with Barry, of course. Yeah. I did a tour with him and the Old Grey Whistle Test. So these calls were coming in. Stefan Grossman, I did an album with him. So I was getting really confident in the studio. And when I met Dave and Annie, it was just another session. I didn't even know. I knew Dave from Long Dancer, and Dave and I had met in clubs and bars and stuff. Yeah. And he's such a funny guy. I could talk about Dave Stewart forever. I've got millions of stories, but we've only got 45 minutes.
Well, maybe we'll share one quick one later.
That's always the funny thing, that no matter who you talk to, who like you, or there are we've interviewed Jimmy Z and Jonice Jameson and different people, and everyone always says that we have so many stories about Dave Stewart. I think we all know that's you. And you just brought this up, and I thought this was a really interesting part in the book where you were talking about how you were doing a lot of session work, and you would be called in to record. And the first time that you met Annie, and that you also mentioned that you, just as you did, that you had known Dave when he was in his first band, Long Dancer. And that's so fascinating to me, all these connections and all these things that were going on in music at the time, that you were connected in a way. There's the great part in your book, I want to read it if you don't mind, the first time that you saw Annie. And you said, Dave looked totally different from the last time I had seen him. He had gypsy-style long earrings and had grown his hair long, and it was dyed vivid red, and he was sporting a goatee beard. He looked a bit like a hippie Texan cowboy with long boots and a country and western-style shirt and jacket. Annie was stunning, the complete opposite of her partner. She was neat and tidy and dressed in the latest punk style, tight, straight leg trousers and a vivid red top, which clashed marvelously with her blonde, spiky hair. So you have this really vivid memory of seeing Annie Lennox for the first time?
Yeah, I do. And yeah, obviously she was Dave's partner. And I thought, what is a attractive, I hadn't heard her sing at this time, but when I heard her voice come in the headphones, it blew me away. I thought, what is she doing with Dave? I mean, Dave is a crazy person. And she seems, I think he was a bit out of it as well the first time I met him. And Annie was very prim and proper. And I thought, oh, yeah, well, that's interesting. And then I heard her Scottish accent, which blew me away. Hello there, Jimmy. Like,
is it opposites attract, maybe?
Well, it must have been. I mean, it worked really well and still does, obviously. I mean, they're very close. But it wasn't until we started recording. I didn't have Annie's voice in my headphone at the time. I just had Pete and Eddie. Oh, no, it wasn't Eddie. It was the session bass player at that time. So we were in the first verse or something of this really fast, da, 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 da. And then Annie's voice came in. And I just went, wow, almost knocked me off the drum stool. I heard this amazing, perfect pitch, stunning vocal. I can't remember which song it was, unfortunately, a long time ago. It was a demo, obviously. It was a demo session. So my first impressions of both of them was I always knew Dave was a good guitar player, but he was right on it, And first impressions. And you're right, opposites attract.
Mm. You also write in your book about what you were just talking about, the first time you heard that voice come through your headphones, I guess it was, and you said her voice soared. That's what you wrote in the book. And then you said something really interesting, and I want you to explain it. You said, or you wrote rather, it was a scary experience to hear a singer with such a range to her voice. Explain what you meant by that. It was a scary experience almost.
Well, to be a session musician is so boring most of the time. You're looking at your watch, you're looking at the clock. Every 3 hours you get paid more. So you get into this boring, like routine of, oh yeah, that sounds nice. And you go and listen to it back and you have to say to the producer, oh, what a good singer. What a great songwriter. When I heard Annie's voice, it was just like, blew me away completely. The best example of what I'm trying to say is if you listen to that song, Why, on Annie's solo, one of Annie's solo albums, her range in that, and there's another one. She's just got this ability to come in almost baritone and then go straight through to like a high falsetto. There aren't many artists in the world that can do that. I can't imagine there's any singers around that really do have that range. And that was apparent from the first demos. It was really outstanding. So that's why it was frightening.
Yeah, it's interesting to when you come across did it give you chills? I mean, did you know how you get chills or you get those things when you come across something that's just extraordinary? You knew
well we played. As I said, the bass player was Andy. He was a session bass player. This is before Eddie, but he and I, so it's him on bass, me on drums, Dave on guitar, and Pete on rhythm guitar and vocals, and Annie. I think we only did 3 songs, but I broke out into a sweat with the energy and the speed of the songs that I was presented with. I mean, Pete had this amazing ability he was just strumming the guitar, just playing the chords, but they always went somewhere interesting. His songwriting was absolutely unbelievable. And Annie, on top of that, was the cream on the cake. So me and the bass player, I remember clearly, we hung around. Usually I'd say, okay, gentlemen, there's the check, sign the receipt, pack up my drums and go. We just hung out in the studio, me and Andy, the bass player, and listened to the playbacks, and they just did a rough mix. And of course, Dave was right on it, Mr. Super Ears. yeah, so that was the different. It was totally different. And when Dave rang me up and asked me to join the band, or let's form a band, I was doing really well financially. I said, Dave, I can't really, it's time consuming. You want me to rehearse every day and form a band. That's a big workload. I'm too busy. And typical Dave said, look, I'll come over. He came over and we had relaxed a bit, had a few cigarettes and sat around and I thought, well, he's right. How many opportunities will I get to join such a good songwriter and such a brilliant lead vocalist? So I went, oh yeah, Dave, sod it, let's do it. So I canceled. Well, I didn't cancel a lot, a long time ago. In fact, when we had those contractual problems with, we couldn't record and we couldn't tour for a while. I went off and did this mad tour with a guy called Ronnie Paisley. It's a great album if you can get it on Pi Records, called Smoking Mirror. And I went off and did this long tour with him for about 6 weeks. And when I came back, Dave and Annie were going, we haven't rehearsed anything. Well, I said, well, I'm still keen. I'm still excited. But at the same time, I do have other projects,
You had to make a living.
Yeah, well, I was doing really well at that point. And then, anyway, then we signed with Logo Records and it was all resolved.
Wow. Well, so the Tourist put out 3 albums, The Tourist, Reality Effect, and Luminous Basement. I'd like to hear about that photo session for the cover of Reality Effect, I believe, where you're all splattered with paint and Annie's wearing the wedding dress and all that. Do you recall any memories about filming that, photographing that album cover and those images?
Yes, do I? Somebody wrote, I've got my little unofficial tourist fan club. I get loads of questions on that. And one of them was, was it your idea? Who was it that set up that photo session? Who was it that came up with these brilliant ideas? And I replied, well, it wasn't me. It certainly wasn't Eddie, man of few words. And no way in the world would it be Peter, like Pete, Mr. Space Cadet. Oh, you're joking. I don't know, photo session, what? So it must have been David and Annie's idea. And what a brilliant idea. All I got was, we were still touring. And I think the management company or the record company said, Jim, can you wear all white? We're having a white photo session. And I had this boiler suit, like Townsend's, Pete Townsend always wore those white. So I was all right. I was all in white. And I turned up, still had no idea what was going on. And Annie's in a wedding dress. I went, hello, Annie, morning, how are you? Good gig last night, wasn't it? Yes, Jim. Yeah, it was good. And we went into this white room and the guy said, what I want you to do is, there are all these tins of paint, all different colors. Can you throw it all over each other? And I went, yes, yes, I would love to. And I think I was the first one. I had a go at Annie. I think it was blue. I can't remember. And she was immaculate. We did a lot of photos before they let us free on the paint. And I couldn't wait, well, none of us could really, with the exception of Annie probably. Couldn't wait to get onto the paint. And I was the first one. And then he said, okay, go. And I just went whoosh. And the most stunning thing that came out of that is the photograph of Annie. If you look closely at Annie's expression, she's in the wedding dress, she's covered in paint, and it's like a surrealist painting. She's got this completely blank expression, which is kind of, look at me, look what they're doing to me. That photograph is so emotional. I really wanted to put it on the cover of my book, and I thought, no. Let's. I don't want it. I don't want to use Annie's face to. So I didn't choose it, but and that was the single. I think one of the single covers for a single. The color photograph was one of the covers. Yeah. So that was that was such a fun time.
Well,
At that point,
oh, sorry.
yeah, we were really like a bunch of pirates at that time. We were all having so much fun, and it captured that album cover. It's the best photo session I've ever done.
Oh, wow.
And I've done a few,
Well, I guess if I was throwing paint around at the people, that might be fun too. How easy was that to clean up? I mean, was this like, did you have to use paint thinner like on your skin?
I don't know, but I remember we all got in a shower and Annie was in there as well. It's like we're all we were like children, and we were trying to shower this paint off, and I don't know, it was just a fun time, and it was a fun band. It really was, Well,
thank you for sharing that. That's very, very fascinating.
One thing I wanted to ask about, and you mentioned Pete, and he was such a prolific songwriter, and you talk about it in the book that he could just go in and write. And of course, Dave and Annie still talk about it, that for the most part, that they didn't write any songs for the Tourist. And one thing that always has struck me about the Tourist is that Annie, once in a while, has a lead vocal. She's often paired with Pete. But you talk about, and it's clear, of course, but you talk about how Annie is this incredible voice. But there weren't a lot of times where the Tourist actually used her voice like maybe they could have, the band could have. And that must have been, did you think we should have done it more? Or what when you look back on it, what did you think?
Yeah, kind of. I know exactly what you mean. And you're not right. She actually, Dave and I did write a few songs. We co-wrote a song called In a Room on one of the albums. And of course, Annie wrote the classic One Step Closer to the Edge.
Yes, right.
Where she sings completely on her own. And that is her song. She wrote that. In fact, when we'd had 2 or 3 hits and I was getting frustrated because as a drummer, after 3 years, it gets a bit kind of predictable. You're playing the same drum patterns all the time. And Blind Among the Flowers, I Only Want to Be With You, most of the, and playing those live every night, my drum patterns were when it came to One Step Closer to the Edge, one step, it was really powerful, but that was the real Annie, and I said to the record company, we should do that as a single because that would put Annie as her song. She sings it brilliantly. It's so emotional. And they went, whoa, you're joking. Everything, it's the post-punk, everything's and I said, well, it would put the whole band more in focus. And I think I approached David and Annie. I can't remember. We were working. The problem is we never had any time. We were always on the road and we were always getting in a bus or getting in the plane, or we never really, it's difficult. I can't remember. I think I might have done. And they probably would have said, oh no, Pete's got all these brilliant songs, which was true. We actually had too many songs. So I know exactly what you mean. And I said, so to answer that, I think the answer would be yes. I think at that point, it would have been a good idea. So it's a shame, really. I love that song. That's one of, and that was like an early Eurythmics feel,
Yeah, exactly.
It is, isn't it? And I think a lot of Eurythmics fans really are focused on that song. They really connect with that song because it is very Eurythmics. And you talk about it in the book. The first time you heard her singing that, she was just at the piano. This was very early in the years of the Tourist, and she was singing it, and kind of surprised.
It was just after Dave rang me, to persuade me, and came over and said that, come on, Jim, we need some commitment. We want you to join. It was just after that. I had a house in Hendon in North London, and the studio, the front room was converted into a studio. So we did all our demos there. So Dave and Annie would turn up about 10 in the morning. Everything was set up. We had the classic 2 Revox tape machines, trying to get 4 tracks together. So we're doing demos in the first few weeks. And we were having a cup of tea, as I remember, in the kitchen. And Annie was still in the front room, which was the studio. And she was just playing on the keyboard that song. And I thought, what is that? And I said, Annie, and we all did. It wasn't just me, what are the chords? Let's work it out. And she was so defensive. She said, no, that is a very personal song. I don't want that. That's got nothing to do with what we're doing. And I said, yeah, but it's such a great song. I think we did do a demo of it eventually. We had to persuade her to do it. And she's such a lovely lady. You can't really bully people, you can't say to a songwriter, you do that. I'm not an A&R man, I'm the drummer, so that was the first time you heard it.
But it didn't become a recording for you all till your last.
That was always there in my mind anyway. I probably would have kept bringing it up, and Jim's on about that song again. All right, let's do it. So there you go. We should have done more of that, in my opinion.
Do you think Annie was just, and I know she wanted to be a songwriter, but do you think she was, because it's interesting, you just said, that she said it's very personal. And do you think she was like, well, maybe this is too personal, and that she wasn't comfortable just yet kind of being that kind of songwriter? She wasn't sure enough about herself?
Well, when you've got someone like Pete Coombs in the band, who is, his lyrics were amazing, completely left of center, completely fitted the emotion of the time. The Pretenders, the Police, the Vibrators, all these great bands were going around. Annie was in a band singing lyrics that she hadn't written. And to me, it was a golden opportunity for her to do her own song. But can you imagine how she felt? She's right next to this with Peter, who's writing these amazing songs and really cool lyrics. I could quote a lot of Pete's words that were absolutely stunning. Unfortunately, in the last album, his lyrics were getting more and more obscure and more hard to understand, for me anyway. So that's just the way it was. She probably lacked a bit of confidence. Don't forget, she was only 20.
Yeah, she's very young.
And fresh out of university and living with this crazy person.
Well, that's a good segue into a funny Dave Stewart story. If you have one you can think of that you think we would all enjoy.
Rex wants a funny Dave Stewart story.
Funny Dave Stewart story. All right. Let me think. I'll try and keep it in context. I'll try and keep it in context with that house and the sessions. We're having a cup of tea, and Dave, he said, it was only a month or so ago. He said, I was coming back. He and Pete used to do some duo gigs. And he said, I had this van, Jim, and he said, and we scored all these pills. We got all these pills and I'm tripping. Dave, I hope you don't mind me saying this. He's probably going to go, oh, Jim, you're a bit over the top. And he said, I had all these illegal things in the van, and we were coming down the hill at Muswell Hill, which is where Annie and Dave lived. There's a hill, and he said, I put my foot on the brakes, and the brakes had failed. And we went round about. So he said, the best thing I could do, I put the handbrake on. He said, I put the handbrake on, the van went on its side, and it slid. I mean, Dave is such a great storyteller. I was, sitting, but all listening, and it slid right onto the steps of a police station. And I'm saying, oh, did it, Dave? 10 o'clock in the morning, having a cup of tea. And so he said, the police came out and they pulled me out of the van, and Pete must have been with it. Oh, no, he dropped Pete off. He was on his own. Oh. And he said, are you okay? He said, yeah, he was so out of it. He's loose and he's bouncing around. Yeah, I'm okay. So they take him into the police station. This is like 3 a.m, according to Dave, and had a cup of tea. How English is that? And they're saying, well, what happened? He said, the brakes failed. I just put the handbrake on, and, he's got his red hair and he looks crazy, I guess. And so they're chatting away, and all these jars had rolled out. I forgot to mention, rolled out. Anyway, Dave swears it's true. He got a little tab of acid, and when they weren't looking, put one in each of their cups of tea, and the conversation suddenly got better. And he said, Jim, he said, this is true. We started laughing, and in the end, the pickup truck had taken the van away, and Dave said, oh, well, I've got to go home now. And I went, oh, okay, Dave, yeah, nice to chat. Yeah, okay, yeah. And he got away with it. Can you imagine? You're trying to record and be serious, and you've got Dave telling stories like that. I'd love to think it was true, and I'm sure it is.
Well, we're going to go with it that it was. How's that?
So there's a small snippet of Dave's humor,
I wonder if that
and
was
his ability.
The pre-spiritual cowboys.
Yeah. So there you go. A quick Dave Stewart story.
Well, we asked for a good story and you gave us one. Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope he doesn't sue me. He's going to say, Jim, you can't say that in a podcast.
Dave tells lots of stories. So
Dave says so many things along those same lines. I wouldn't worry about it.
Now you do talk in the book quite a bit that 4 of the 5 members of the band were often inebriated and often not Annie. So you all would partake in a lot of drinking and maybe some drugs. Is that right? Back in the day?
Maybe. Well, Annie, to her credit, kept it all together. I mean, I remember a bar in New York. We met Blondie, and of course, Clem Burke, the drummer, and I became friends. He's a Who fan. He wanted to know everything about Keith Moon. And when I told him I'd met Keith Moon, he was all over me like a rash. Hey, Jim, let me buy you a drink. Of course, we all wanted to meet Debbie, and she wasn't there. And they all wanted to meet Annie. And of course, Annie wasn't there, because after the gig, Annie would keep it all together, back to the hotel. The rest of us would, well, not so much Dave, because they were together, but so it usually ended up with me, Pete and Eddie going out and doing stuff. And so that gives you an example. Annie, to her credit, kept it all together. She'd have the odd glass of wine. And like I said, it was a fun band. We were having a time of our lives, and so was Annie in Annie's way. And we were just doing the predictable, it's party time.
You're only young once, and I suspect for most people, you're not in a successful band either. So that was I'm sure a fantastic, great time for you.
And Clem Burke, oddly enough, while I think of it, ended up working with Dave.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was in the Eurythmics, and I was thrilled, because he's such a lovely guy, complete Premier freak, loves Premier drums. And of course, that's what Keith Moon from The Who would recycle them
Yeah.
in a regular basis. I knew a friend of mine who had to, every time he smashed his drum kit up, he'd have to get him another one all over America, you know. And Clem wanted to know every single thing. I did it when I was with Colin Blunstone, who I mentioned earlier, you know, from the Zombies. We did a concert supporting the Small Faces, Gary Glitter, and the Who at the top of the bill, you know. So I met Keith in the toilet, actually, in the green room. And he did the classic drunk, you know. Keith loved to drink. And he put his hand up in the toilet. So we're standing next to each other. You know, I got long hair. And he said, they won't let me in, Jim. This is Keith Moon. You know, he probably thought I was a roadie or something. He said, they won't let me in. I said, won't they, Keith? Who won't let you in? He said, my own bloody band. They wouldn't let him in the dressing room because he had this habit of rearranging dressing rooms and hotels. And so Clem loved all those stories. And Clem and I just sort of, you know, we were there, I think we were there till 6 a.m, just telling stories. And yeah, so he's a lovely guy. And I was thrilled that he ended up working with Dave, you know.
It's so interesting that you mentioned Clem Burke, because it's so fun to watch him, you know, in video and of live performances and with Dave and Annie. But I've been watching a lot of tourist videos in preparation for this interview, and you two are really interesting when you're performing. And it's I mean, I'm not talking about just, you know, the drumming. You do some, I don't know what I would call it, some performing on your own, where you have facial expressions, you know, you're twirling, and you do some really cool things. You were kind of really, you know, if people were paying attention, not just to Annie and Pete up front singing, if you look in the back there with the drummer, you're having a lot of fun back there.
Well, I learned that from the 60s watching bands like The Who. I mean, Keith Moon was so animated. And
animated, yeah, that's the word, animated. Yeah.
Animated, yeah. And I used to hang out at the Marquee Club in Wardour in Soho in London and watch all these bands before I turned pro, you know. And I'd always stare at the drummer. And I thought, I want to be like that. That's what I want to do. I'm going to get all the pretty girls. I'm going to go out and, you know, look at me. Oh, I'm over here. I'm at the back, but here I am.
Right.
And Clem Burke, you're right. Clem had that lovely way of, you know, everything's exaggerated. Brilliant drum, and really, but really good to watch. Yeah.
So we're probably winding down the podcast now because it's been almost 50 minutes. But tell us, Jim, a little about where you perform today in Australia or wherever, and what you do, and maybe where folks can go and see you if they want. I know you post a lot of things on your social media about gigs you have and all that. I see that, but
yeah. Well, you know that Elton John song, "The Club at the End of the Street." That's quite a classic sort of, which is a lovely story about, you know, everyone, all the locals go there. I've got a club at the end of my street, and it's called the Village Social Bar in Nunda. Nunda, the suburb where I live, it's kind of become trendy and kind of fashionable. And it's a little pop-up bar, singles bar, cocktails. Dave would love it. He's a cocktail. I keep asking Dave, when you come to Brisbane, let me take you to my local bar, you know, cocktails. So I work there. Sorry, my voice is going. Every Saturday.
Yeah, I was afraid that was going to happen to me. I'm still.
So I'm like, So I'm like the house drummer, and I invite all my favorite musicians every Saturday. I'm in a different band. Usually they're solo artists. I've got a guy called Tim Gage who toured England, recorded with Jimmy Barnes, who is a big face, a big name in Australia. Great singer, and he's a lovely guy. And he's kind of retired, and he teaches music. He said, Jim, I love coming down and we do this. So we've got a little trio called the Bargazers. I've got another band called the Dodgy Brothers, which is just a duo. So I'm still gigging around. I mean, at the moment, it's only one every Saturday. And I've got a great guy, a Maori guy from New Zealand, who's got a great voice like Ray Charles. And he does a lot of downbeat reggae. And I love reggae. So at the moment, I'm happy as a sandboy by doing that. And I book the bands and I, which is a bit time consuming, and they're just people that I really like and good players. So I'm very lucky that I can still do that. I get offered tours now and again, but I don't tour anymore. I don't like, I've got my family and my 8-year-old son is just over there on the computer. Sky, what game are you playing? What? Yeah, he's. Oh. Yeah, so I'm a family man now.
Yeah,
I've had enough hotels.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm very lucky.
Well, Mark, do you have anything else you'd like to ask Jim before we kind of wrap this up?
I think it would be interesting, your thoughts. So I think if I understand it, when the Tourist broke up, Pete basically left. You were in Australia, I believe, and Pete basically left, and it sort of just the band broke up from there. I wonder if you ever think back on if that hadn't happened, what the future might have been. Would things have changed? Would Dave and Annie become more involved in songwriting? Do you ever think about that, or did things just do you ever think like that? Or just things happen the way they're supposed to, things move on? What about that?
Yeah, I'm a great believer in that word synchronicity, which I can't spell. It's things happen, I mean, that's another funny story. I'm 3 a.m. I'm in a bar with Pete the night he split in Melbourne, and I was getting frustrated, playing the same songs all the time. Da 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 da. I love reggae and I love jazz and I love blues, and I wasn't doing any of those things. And I think Pete had got to that point, and he's so funny. He said, "Jim, I'm going home in the morning." I said, "Oh, are you, Pete?" I said, "Do you know where we are?" He said, "Yeah," because he didn't quite know where we were. He said, "Yeah, we're in Australia." I said, "Well, it's a long way home." He said, "No, I'm going home." He said, "Yeah, I missed the family," and he was the only married person, I went, "Oh, okay, Pete," and usual sort of Pete conversation. I came down the next morning, and there's Dave and Annie having breakfast, looking really. I said, "Morning, how are you? What's happening?" And they said, "He's gone." I said, "What?" "Pete's gone home." And he'd rung the record company or the management company, organised a flight, and he'd gone, he'd left. So I said, "Well, now we're a 4-piece. We've still got I think we had about another 10 gigs to go. Let's go for it. Dave is such a brilliant guitar player. He could play rhythm, and musically we wouldn't really miss the guitar part so much, but we would certainly miss Pete's vocal. So we did. I know, I can't remember, 6 or 8 gigs, just as a 4-piece, with Annie doing all the vocals on her own. But of course, poor old Annie is still singing lyrics, some of which none of us understood, because at that time Pete was really getting out. His songwriting was becoming very obscure, and it was quite sad, really, because I was still wanted to keep it all together, and we just realised it's not going to work. We couldn't ask Dave and Annie to write enough songs for a 2-hour gig. Right. Give us some songs. Yeah. So, and I think thinking back, as you asked me, do I think back? I think it was the best thing that could have happened, because Dave and Annie, if you think of it, all those years, all their songwriting was just bubbling under. They were probably as frustrated as I was. Let's do something different. Let's do something. And so I think it was just the way things happened, really.
Wow.
Well, let's have you talk just a little bit about Dave and Annie and how they went on to Eurythmics. And the first time, I think Dave invited you over to hear some early Eurythmics. Is that right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I just organised a big party at a club called Dingwalls in London, in Camden Town. Well, I had my going away party, and gave Dave and Annie an invite, and I said, "Look, the theme is bad taste because everybody in England thinks that going to Australia, the Aussies, oh no, why would you go there? You know." So I thought, oh well, dress theme, bad taste. I was in drag. I've got a great photo of me. I've got these amazing boobs, and Annie is grabbing one of my boobs. It was a great party. But that week, Dave asked me, he said, "Come to the studio. I want to play you this demo we've done." And it was Sweet Dreams. And he said, "I want you to do there's a little ching, a little, percussion thing I want you to do, like a little Chinese gong." And he played it, and I blew me up. I said, "Dave, there's no guitar. Where's the guitar? You're one of the best guitar players in the world." But he said, "No, Jim, I did this on 4-track." And I thought it's another one of his stories, or did it on 8-track. I thought it was one of these stories about, the van slider. I went, "Oh yeah, David." But he played it again. I said, the lyrics, and I said, "Dave, how about this one understatement?" I said, "Dave, that could go top 10. It went to #1 all over the world, I mean, in Australia, I'm going, yes, look at it in the chart, it's gone up.
Yeah, now we're celebrating the 40th anniversary this year of that song.
I know, isn't it hard to believe? 40 years. Yeah. And it still sounds like one of Dave's stories. It still sounds unbelievable.
Yes. Well, that's what a great way to put that. What a great way to put that. You must. I think a lot of people have a lot of fond memories of The Tourist, and you had a really huge following, and that still a lot of people who really love The Tourist. Would you like to see? I don't know who it would be. I don't know what record company even has the rights to it now, but sort of a box set of the Tourist music or something, and it's sort of not had it. It sort of deserves to make kind of a remastered thing to happen.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm very proud of all those 3 albums. I'm proud of everything we did, and I quite often on my little unofficial Tourist fan club, I get a lot of people asking me that question. In fact, somebody said the other week they can't get, they're finding it difficult to get old Tourist stuff. I think that would be a brilliant idea. I mean, when Dave had his party some years back in London, I wrote to him and I said, "Dave, why don't we fly me over and we'll open your gig with Annie singing I Only Want to Be With You. It'll be a blast, And that didn't work out, unfortunately. But things like that would be fabulous, I mean, a box set. Ask Mr. Google or ask Mr. CBS. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. Or ask Mr. Logo. They've all got, they've all got rights to those recordings. I'd buy one.
Yeah, so would I.
Well, there's three cells just right here, but
oh, there you go.
Well, is there anything that we've not asked you that you'd like to say, or for in the podcast? Anything else you'd like to tell us about?
Well, yes. One of my hobbies is weather forecasting, and I was just wondering if you just had a big storm, didn't you, in California?
Yeah, I'm in California. We're still having a big storm. This has been like, I think 10 days straight of this, these atmospheric rivers of rain. I mean, we were having a terrible drought, and now we have too much water.
Yeah, I know. Well, my children we've just got back from Japan snowboarding, and it's incredible in Japan. There's so much snow. In Europe, they're having a heat wave.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my little hobby. I don't want to bore everybody with that.
Yeah,
But
it's
well
been
done, guys. You survived.
we've been praying for rain, and now we're getting way too much of it.
That'll teach you.
We thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. It's been really great.
Well, I've really enjoyed it, guys, and it's so nice. In fact, it's great. The American accent. I've with Mr. Stevens over there. I've seen so many photos and seen so. He's got this amazing American accent. I don't know
because he mentioned. Is Jim going to mention my accent?
Yeah, it's God damn it! I think it's a great accent. No, it's wonderful.
It's a very
it's
grand
so nice.
Southern accent. It's very it's
Yeah.
very sophisticated, cultured Southern.
Well, it is.
I'm on the East Coast, so yeah, and in the South, so yeah, so it is what it is.
It is what it is.
But I do want to say, your book is really wonderful. It's a great read. It's called We Were Tourists, and if anyone's listening and you don't have this book, you can go to Amazon or any online retailer and get it. It's really a great read. You get a lot of great information about the tourist, about Dave and Annie. And I'm not going to give it away, but the story in the book about the Gypsy Rose fortune teller. So I'm not going to give it away, but it's worth the read. And then you refer back to it in the epilogue. And again, I don't want to give it away because I want people to go buy this book. But there's a great story about Dave and Annie, about this storyteller that you all met, and then you and Annie refer back to it many years later. So it's really worth if nothing else, go buy the book for that one story about the storyteller, the fortune teller.
Oh, and just one more thing I forgot to mention. When I asked Annie for permission to publish the book, it was called Once Were Tourists. That was my idea. And when she wrote back and asked me to change that sentence, she said, "Why don't you call it We Were?" We were.
Yeah.
So I went, yeah, great idea. Yeah, so well done, Annie. You came up with the title.
Oh, so Annie's responsible for your title then.
Well, the first word, anyway.
The first.
Once were, I mean.
Okay, I think they were both good titles. So I don't think you've gone wrong with yours, but it has been interesting following you. And by the way, it's great when you come on the Facebook boards and all the different fan boards and talk to all of us and give us insight. And that's really great. It's really cool. And I'm so pleased to have you on this podcast. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Yes. Take care.
Thank you.